We welcome you to this forum, Chief, and we really appreciate you agreeing to participate. The goal here is to learn.
Absolutely.
The goal here is to learn about the state of our police department, its policies and good practices, and how it might be improved. We hope the information you provide will also help us to know what reforms to support. The chilling Neely incident, in which a black man with a rope around him was marched blocks between police horses, has made us aware that even non-lethal actions can change the image of a city and damage community trust. Certainly the death of Luis Fernando Argueta has put into question policies and practices concerning deadly use of force and the role that race plays in these decisions. George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis and Rayshard Brooks' killing in Atlanta have widened the lens and raised questions nationwide about relations between communities and the police who are there to protect and serve. We now know that we ignore these questions at our peril. There are 4 people, including me, on the panel. The questions are grouped under 4 topics. 1, hiring and retention. 2, policies and practices. 3, transparency and accountability. And 4, Chief, about your vision for the GPD, the 21st Century Policing Initiative, and My Brother's Keeper Initiative. So we're going to start with Kenneth McPherson. Kenneth?
Good evening, Chief. We would like to better understand the issues around the hiring and retention of police officers.
Good evening.
Are there any Galveston Police Department officers who were fired from other agencies? Did you hear the question, Chief?
Did you hear the question?
I certainly can't speak for previous administrations, but I can say that I haven't hired any at this point that have been fired. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
So the second question I have.
Hello.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Do
Yes,
you not
we hear
hear
you.
me? Okay.
Yeah, we're hearing you, Chief.
So the second question I have is, can the city require officers to live in the city of Galveston?
I assume they could probably try. I don't know how many on this call actually live in the city, but I can tell you there's more issues than just living in the city. I'm in the middle of a hiring process now. When I moved here, I got maybe half the house that I thought I would get for the budget that I spent. It's a very expensive item to live on. It just is. My cadets start out at $39,000. And so depending on their lot in life, space for children, where their family are, the school system, taxes, insurance rates for flood and wind are absolutely ridiculous. And so I moved to this island, even though I could double the house in the mainland, because I do believe in living in the community that you serve. But I can certainly understand why a $40,000 cop would not, if they can get more for their family and have a better quality of life. And they shouldn't have to live just anywhere just so they can say that they're on the island. But certainly there's things we should be doing to make sure we incentivize those.
Okay. Thank you for that very complete answer. It's been credibly reported by government that far-right racist groups are urging members to join police forces. Have you seen any evidence of this here, and how do we guard against such people joining our police department?
I can't say that I've personally seen it, but there's several things we do to try to guard against that. Number one, we do a thorough background investigation, which includes checking their social media accounts, most people with that state of mind can't help themselves. And so they end up posting on one of their social media accounts or something, or an old picture from college, like we've seen with politicians, et cetera. And so we look at their social media. We also do a psychological exam before they're actually hired. And that psychological exam includes a component of implicit bias, where they try to identify that with the doctors. So that's not done by the police department, that's done by psychological staff. And so those would probably be the main two that we try to do to guard against that.
Okay. Let's see. Do you currently have de-escalation training, and if so, what exactly does that consist of?
That's a very loaded question. Absolutely, we have de-escalation training. So the state requires a course titled de-escalation, but de-escalation is a component of many parts of the training. It's part of the crisis intervention training, it's part of the mental health training, it's part of the use of force training. But course by title, de-escalation, yes, every officer in the state of Texas is required to have it. And it includes things like decision-making model, identifying signs of someone who may be in a mental crisis, using time and distance to your advantage, communication skills, and then, of course, some role play scenarios.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief. That's I've learned things already. I'm very grateful to learn. I'm going to turn the questioning over now to Sylvia Gongora, whose photo picture is not appearing here, but she's going to be the second questioner. Sylvia?
Good evening, Ms. Sylvia.
Good evening, Chief Hale. I am a BOI, just returned back to the island a couple of years ago from Austin. My questions are going to deal with policies and practices.
All right.
Chief, what are the GPD's policies on use of force, including tasers, and our choke holds banned?
So I don't know how I can, there's probably at least 10. There's a policy for use of force overall. There's policy for deadly force. There's a policy for tasers. There's a policy. So there's various policies throughout, several pages each, some of them shorter and longer. But overall, our policies are based on two things. One, sanctity of life. Two, the constitutional standard of reasonableness. And so that's the foundation. And then from there, we train on the use of force and all those things. The chokehold, that's one that's really going to require a lot of education because, number one, there's two different holds that I believe the public thinks is considered a chokehold. One would be a lateral vascular restraint, which is the restriction of the blood. And one would be a chokehold, which is the restriction of air. We don't teach either in GPD, so they weren't even necessarily addressed in our policies, but that obviously, we were about 75% complete with our policy, going back through those policies to look at those things. The problem I think the public's going to have is anytime they see an officer touching a neck or a head, they're considering a chokehold. But if they're not restricting the airway, it's not choke.
Okay.
However, I did it today, and I challenge anyone to go out there and watch a high school wrestling match and see them not control a head or a neck of a 13-year-old wrestling in high school wrestling. So we're using this global term to basically mean anytime touching the neck. And if that's what we're really asking, then I think that's what we need to be saying as a country, not just chokeholds, because choke is specific to cutting off someone's airway, which they should not be doing. And we've never touched someone's head or neck, which is what we really have to get to the root of.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chief. If an officer shoots someone, must they call an ambulance immediately?
Absolutely, as soon as it's safe.
Okay, great. And are no knock warrants used?
Yes, they are on a limited basis, but people have to understand the purpose of a no knock. So, number one, I can't authorize a no knock. I can authorize it at my level, but a DA in Galveston County, anyway, a DA and a judge have to sign that warrant in order to even get a no knock warrant. So it's gone through at least 3 levels of checks and balances. It's gone through the police supervisor, it's gone through a DA's office, and it's gone through a judge who said this meets the criteria to be a no knock, because it requires an extra affidavit essentially to get that type of search warrant. And so, for instance, a hostage situation, you don't want us to have to go out and tell them where we are in order to go save this child out of a house. So no knocks absolutely have a purpose, but I also believe we got to make sure checks and balances and criteria for using those.
Okay.
All right, thank you. What Galveston, I'm sorry. What Galveston Police Department policies changed as a result of the Neely incident? And has the policy been reviewed? And if so, will the results be made public? Chief, are you there? Chief Hale?
So I believe they went out right after. So
You're cutting out.
Yeah, we
at
missed,
the
we
end of the
missed,
day,
We missed half the beginning, I'm
the
sorry.
change was we eliminated the use of the technique of the language. What's in?
Chief,
Can you? Yes, can you hear me?
Chief, you're breaking up
Is
a
my sound
little.
gone again?
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
could you
Yes,
start?
I'm here.
Could you answer that question from the beginning again?
Can you guys not hear me?
We can
No,
hear you
it was,
now.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Can you guys hear me better? So
That's good.
can't hear you anymore.
Are you there? There you are. Now you're muted, Chief. There you go.
all right, I moved and lost my entire internet connection. I apologize.
That's all right.
No problem.
I'm trying to make sure you hear me now.
Yeah, re-ask your question, Sylvia, please.
Okay, what Galveston Police
Okay,
Department?
I got it. What policy
Okay.
from the Neely incident?
Correct.
All right. So first of all, we eliminated the use of the technique. What's important?
Problems.
Well, you're breaking up again, Chief.
Understand
Yeah, can't hear you. Sorry.
is that prior to units included, and it was a very, hold, just a moment.
See if you can get the audio back on, Chief.
Chief?
Okay, is that better?
That's better.
Yes.
Okay, so it was a very widely taught technique. In fact, we didn't invent it. We learned it from another agency. So it's not something that Galveston came up with, and it's still being used in many places. However, we did eliminate the use of technique, and they must wait on a transport unit, which is what they did 90% of the time, including that same day. But that unit happened to already be at the jail. So anyway, we suspended the use of it. We suspended the entire mounted unit from August until Mardi Gras, while we created a new SOP and how we'll handle those things to include waiting on a transport. We retrained every single officer. They had to go through a full retrain of 40 hours to be recertified. The primary issue found in the investigation was that there was no internal SOP because they were not actually a unit within the police department. These were officers who were doing this as an auxiliary duty. And so we created an internal SOP, and then any other policy failures throughout the investigation were addressed. As you're aware, Chapter 143 is very stringent on what can and cannot be released. So we can't release the entire investigation to the public because it doesn't meet those thresholds for a legislator. But as you know, we also had 2 outside agencies investigated. We didn't investigate it ourselves. We had the Galveston County Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers both look at it, as well as the DA's office, in fact. So 3 different agencies looked at it.
Okay.
So therefore, the results won't be made public since it's not.
The new SOP will likely be public when we release all policies, but
Good.
the actual investigative file. No.
All right, great, thank you. Now, we know that you frequently visit with community groups. What, if any, are GPD's current community policing practices? And will you involve your officers in intensified community policing officers in the near future?
I guess that question, I got to ask what you're seeking. We do a lot of things within community. So I guess I'd ask first, what does that look like to you all? What do you want it to look like?
Like, do you have little, small police stations in certain areas or anything, or?
No, those when storefronts and things became, once technology caught up, storefronts became sleeping holes for police officers because of storefronts. Quite frankly, when I began policing 30 years ago, were because we had to go to a place to find a phone or a computer to type our reports, et cetera. That is now all done by cell phone and mobile computers. And so the only reason to go to a storefront would be to hide. And so that's kind of why you don't see as many of them around the country anymore, is because it was a technology issue. It wasn't a presence issue. Secondly, yes, I can assign 5 or 6 officers to do nothing but community policing. And the group I had over there to be out there in the community, going to meetings and doing those things. But as you know, one of the things we're doing currently, I'm doing Zoom meetings just like I am with you right now. I'm all at these meetings and forums, et cetera. We're looking at doing the recognition program. We are, of course, always have CPA, CPPA, the Explorers. I rented out a movie theater and took the kids from Sandpiper Cove one time. I started the first back to school swim party at the city park for underprivileged kids, where they all get a backpack full of school supplies on their way out of the party. And so we've had 2 of those now, and we give them scuba lessons, et cetera, while we're in the midst of those things. We brought the DOJ in and started strengthening police community relations. Some of you may have sat in on those initial boards where we had over 100 people from cross sections of this island community to make sure everybody was represented, no matter sex, gender, race. We even went down to East End, West End, Midtown, et cetera, downtown, business owners. We didn't want anybody left out because we all know us West Enders think different than the East Enders, right? So but we got a cross section of all those communities and had over 100, I think 10, 20 people in those forums to come up with better ways to increase our presence and our relationship. And so it all depends on what you want to look like, but we can certainly explore other things that we can do. But we have a lot of things that we do. Cops and clergy every single month. We've been doing cops and clergy breakfast. We just did that one by Zoom, even though we couldn't have breakfast. And so we're open to anything as long as it makes sense and doesn't fit into one of the things we already have going.
Well, that's wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I will now turn the questions over to Roxy Williamson, who has questions about transparency and accountability.
And I apologize. One more thing on the last one is our protest process. Our protest process, when I got here, it was just you threw a bunch of bodies out there and you managed it. Now what we do, beginning probably with the Neely protest more of all, we now contact those organizers. We create relationships. We did the same thing with the Slab Party. We did the same thing with the Black Lives Matter movement here in the last few months. But we try to contact those organizers and set up ground rules so that we're all operating on the same page rather than just going out there and trying to look militaristic and use force. And so I think that's very important for building these relationships by hearing these folks while letting them exercise their First Amendment rights.
Okay.
And I apologize.
Yes, no doubt. Okay. Roxy?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chief Hale. Good evening to all of my BOIs like myself and Miss Sylvia on the call.
I'm bought on the
before I get
island too, you know.
I started with you, beautiful. I started with you. Chris, I just a little housekeeping right now. Christy, are you seeing the questions and the comments and the, I see it, never mind. Thank you, Christy. Again, my name is Roxy Williamson. I'm a BOI as well, just moved back like Miss Sylvia a couple of years ago from Atlanta. And now I am currently anchored on the island and I'm so excited to be here. So we're gonna start there. I believe my first question you already answered, but I'm going to ask it for posterity's sake in case you wanted Chief Hale to add anything to this particular question. My first question is, who investigates GPD excessive force, racial bias complaints? And if you could give us an example. And I know you said earlier, like with the Neely case, that the Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers came in and helped with that. Would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. So it depends on the type of complaint. So for layman's terms, I like to use informal versus formal, first of all. So if it's an informal complaint, say you're mad about a citation or the officer was simply being rude, but no use of force, things like that, then those are typically investigated by a supervisor. And then they send their recommendations up to me. If they think it rises to more than informal discipline, then they will refer that up to Office of Professional Standards, or better known as Internal Affairs. Formal complaints, I have 2 sergeants assigned directly to me. They sit in my suite. They don't report to anybody but me, and they're called the Office of Professional Standards. So formal complaints, whether it be use of force, racial profiling, things of that sort, then those 2 investigate. However, if it's a criminal case, as you know, I've had to arrest 3 officers in my 2 years here already, and I'm certainly not proud of that. But I think it does show that we try to police ourselves. So if it's a criminal case, then it will either go to one of my detectives, the DA's office, or sometimes the Sheriff's Department. If it's deadly force, the DA's office, in conjunction, we don't investigate any deadly force internally. That's investigated by the DA's office in conjunction with either sheriff or the Rangers as well. And then they come to their conclusions. They take those to a grand jury, and that's what we go by.
That's the perfect segue into my second question. What do you say to people who insist that police should not be investigating other officers?
I think it depends on the complaint. If it's simple rudeness, how much resources do you want to spend on that, right? I mean, we can look at the body cam and either it happened or it didn't. Because when we think about these complaints, I think it's important. Well, we'll talk about it in the next question, but I think one of the staples of being a good police department is showing that you can police yourself. The easiest way to get under federal consent decree is for them to come in and see that we've had 100 complaints and nobody's ever gotten any kind of discipline, et cetera. And so that we sustain and discipline, whether people agree on the level of discipline is one thing, but the fact that we sustain complaints and discipline folks for those complaints is what shows we can police ourselves. If we don't think we can police ourselves, then that's when you need to take other actions to make sure other outsiders do it. But that needs to come with a pattern of not taking care of your business.
How many excessive force?
Aggressive model I use. I've never had a termination in my, I've been a supervisor. I began a first line supervisor probably in the year 2000, so 20 years, and I've never had a termination overturned. And I think that's because, even though we see all these about arbitrators turnover, terminations, et cetera, but I think that's because I use a progressive model. I've already coached them. I've already retrained them. I already gave them 1 day off and then 5 days off, and then I fire them. rather than jumping to the conclusion of firing them if their first offense in 15 years, et cetera. And so I try to use a progressive discipline model. And it's not as fast, it's not as pretty, but it usually sustains itself.
Okay, thank you for that. That was a really good answer. Sorry, I kind of lost my place here. And next question. How many excessive force complaints against GPD officers have been lodged in the last 3 years? How many were deemed justified? And what types of penalties imposed? And was anyone fired?
So since I got here January of 2018, I went back to that year. Since that time, there were 33 use of force complaints that I have on my records. 3 are still open. 1 was sustained and they received a suspension. At least 2 others that I know for sure were what I call negotiated exits. They chose to resign rather than wait for what I was going to give them for their discipline. 18 were exonerated, which means, yes, they used force, but after reviewing all the data and the response to the resistance at hand, they were, I guess, what the public would call justified. 2 were withdrawn by the complainants themselves, and 7 were unfounded. And so I think it's important also when you look at raw numbers across the country, not just Galveston. I think you all need to understand this. So, for instance, the week after the Floyd incident, I got a complaint from a tourist who said my cop pulled him yanked him out of their hotel room without a reason, threw him up against the wall, cursed him out, beat him, all these allegations. We look at the video, cursed him out, and then didn't apologize. And my sergeant says, "Chief, I don't see any of that." I said, "Well, surely the officer didn't apologize." He said, "Yeah, he did." I said, "So, okay, bring he was from Houston." I said, "Bring him down, let him watch the video." And literally after he watched the video, he says, "I see now why you guys don't trust the media. That is not how I remember this, and I'm sorry for wasting your time." This was just in the last month or so, because his perception of what happened that day is not what happened on video, right? Because we never yanked him out of the room. We asked him to come out of the room. We did pat him down. And then the lady next door said, "No, I called, even though she gave the wrong room number." So they're at the wrong room because the front desk and the caller gave us the wrong room number.
Wow.
And we've had another one on a traffic stop. Her and her mother came down. We let her and her mom video. And mom says, "I don't know what you're talking about. None of that happened, young lady. Let's go." Right? And so it happens. And so just because we get the complaints doesn't mean, but certainly some of them are.
Yeah.
Okay. Are public complaints and officers' disciplinary records available to the public? And if not, why?
The answer I hate always giving depends. So we're back to formal, what I call formal and informal. So if you read, and it's public knowledge, you can go in there and read the whole chapter for yourself. It's Government Code Chapter 143. And there's a section on there that specifically talks about this. So officers essentially have 2 personnel files, for lack of a better term. One we call the A file, which is formal discipline. The state defines formal discipline as suspension, demotion, or termination. If they get any one of those 3 disciplines, then yes, their file is open to the public and you can get it from Human Resources. They also have what we call a G file, and those letters come in alphabets of the subtitles in Chapter 143. But that's informal discipline. So if I put them on an employee improvement plan because they were tardy or rudeness or whatever, or what we call a reprimand, which is a chief's notice of deficient behavior in the progressive model, then those files are not open to the public. But you can certainly look up Chapter 143 of the Government Code, and it breaks all those things down.
Galveston has a civilian review board. Are its meetings regular? Who calls the meetings? Are its findings public? And if not, will you support making the findings open to the public?
In fact, we just changed the CRB, a few of the rules and how it's presented because of Chapter 143. But they were, prior to COVID, they met quarterly or as needed. If we had more cases and they need to meet more, then they could certainly meet. But overall, they meet quarterly. The chairman is supposed to call the meeting. Typically, it's my folks that initiate it, but it's really the chairman's duty to call those meetings. They have an option to determine if it was a sufficient investigation or they want further investigation. And then, yes, those results go to the city secretary, so I assume they are certainly open record.
Okay.
And this isn't a question, but that just made me think, how are those people chosen for the review board?
So there are, I believe, 6. I don't have the ordinance in front of me, I apologize. But each council person appoints one and the mayor appoints one, and they have to live in the district in which they're being appointed from. And they're appointed to 2-year. What's that?
They're appointed. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
It's either 2-year or 3-year term. I have to look at the ordinance again, but I believe it's 2-year terms.
Okay. And my last question for you. Does the department track traffic stops by race, along with a record of the actions taken, for instance, whether they were given a warning, sobriety test, arrested, a ticket, etc.?
Yes, and actually you can pull the racial profiling report directly from the DPS website. We have to submit by March of every year, we have to submit a racial profiling report for all traffic stops. And so sobriety tests would not be on there, but some of the things that are the reason, whether it was a moving violation or we already had them as a suspect, et cetera, the race, the arrest, the search, if we searched the car or not, and if we did search the car, did they consent or not, are the primary information. Next year, I've already contacted the University of North Texas. There's a professor there who does some analysis. So right now, all we have is raw numbers, but I'm going to hopefully commission a university professor to do an analysis of that data as well. So besides having the numbers, we'll know what his analysis is and if he thinks there's bias within those numbers. So I can give you an example from this year's report that we submitted in March for last year's data. There were over 11,600 traffic stops, 5,000 verbal warnings, 2,000 written warnings, 4,000 citations, 482 arrests, et cetera. And then it breaks down those by race. Blacks were 2795, Asian 260, Hispanic Latino was 6,000, which was even surprising to me. White was 2545, and Alaska or Native American was 48.
All right.
You all still have me?
Thank you for your answers.
My battery's about to die. One.
We appreciate
Let me
you.
get my plug.
Yo.
Hang on just a second.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, Chief. It's very interesting. So a citizen can actually go find out how many African Americans, white people, et cetera, have been stopped and what's been done to them by Galveston police, right?
Absolutely. For every department in the state of Texas.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for those answers so far. We're going to probably go a little more general now. We mentioned the 21st Century Policing Initiative, which deals in large part with community participation with police forces. Do you embrace its themes, and do you think that our mayor and city council and police union should formally embrace them as well? Did you hear me?
It's funny you asked that because last year for both my civil service exams for sergeant and lieutenant promotion, changed their reading list, and that document was part of that list. And so every person applying for promotion was required to read it, learn it, and be tested on it. So absolutely, I speak for the council or the union and what they believe, but it's part of my promotion process.
And can you tell us a few of the things that initiative covers?
It talks about transparency and and gives you some guidelines for trying to be more transparent. It talks about items like officer wellness is even part of it, technology and how you use that technology. And so there are 6 basic pillars.
Okay, all right. And then there's also the My Brother's Keeper initiative, with which I believe you're familiar. And it, as I understand it, it calls for officials' pledges to review and, if necessary, reform use of force policies. And I guess from your earlier answers, we're in or have done some of that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
we were 75% through it. We started.
Okay.
What's that?
And would you support?
We started all over. So right.
Would you support Galveston, other city officials, the mayor and council, for instance, taking that pledge?
I don't know if I'll support it by name, only because there's a bunch of initiatives out there. And so how many do you adopt and say you actually support versus, but the action of reviewing and fixing, absolutely.
Okay. And I know that you are very interested in telling us what your vision for the police department is. Can you give us a concise statement of your vision for the GPD's future? What do you expect to do?
Well, first of all, I want to continue to the transition from warrior to guardian. This island police department, for whatever reason, has always prided itself on being soldiers and warriors first. I believe they need to transition to guardian first, with the ability to flip the switch to warrior at times. At Santa Fe, my guys were some of the first ones there. They ran the entire operation from the outside on SWAT, etc. And 1 or 2 of our guys were the initial contact with the arrestee. Some of my guys came back to work with blood on the able to do those things as well, and not always be officer friendly, as they say. But on a daily basis, 99% of the time, I need them to be guardians. Second would be continue to hire community-oriented police officers. One of the very questions I ask on every single interview, I interview every single applicant that makes it to my level before hiring. We had no community service in their history away, because you can't tell me you want to help the community when helping the community is free. You can go hand out soup, you can hand out socks at Christmas. I didn't have a criteria, but I needed to come from the heart, not from an order from the chief. Build upon principles of procedural justice. I already brought in outside instructors and gave every sergeant a course on procedural justice, many of which, I'd probably say most of which, had never even heard the term procedural justice and doing things the right way. Return to a focus on crime rather than these social issues. There's a lot of talk about defunding police, but I think the defunding will happen organically if I'm not answering mental health calls and homeless calls and those things that within themselves are not illegal. If those same people commit a crime, then absolutely. But most of the time, it's just they want them moved on. And then that's where use of force incidents and things that we see on TV come from, because we should never have been there in the first place. We're not the proper tool. But I know you all have heard me say that for 2 years now. Officer wellness. We have to find a way to deal with police suicides, PTSD, and all those things, but I think it's only going to get worse after COVID, because we're out there on the front lines every day. I've had 3 of my officers probably in the last month get it from those parties and such, in protests we're having to work. I've had civilians get it. And so it creates a toll. And none of these packages, we don't get stimulus checks, and none of these packages are going to affect these heroes who are out there on the line every day. So we got to find a way to deal with Officer Hill. And then finally, provide proper tools. I was asked to bring a peer intervention program to the state based on EPIC and a Georgetown University study. And so I actually got a state meeting next week up in Dallas. And it's one thing to write a policy that says, but we've never trained them with the proper tools to do that. And we're not the first industry. What was encouraging to me is they already been through this in, say, for instance, operating rooms. Nurses didn't know how to interview doctors who were messing up a surgery because the doctor is the king in that surgery room, right? Or co-pilots in the plane when the pilot's about to hit a mountain. So we're not the first industry to grow through this, where younger officers are going to have to, at some point, have the courage and the tools to intervene when an older officer is messing up.
And is that the kind of thing that you discuss with the city manager and on a regular basis? Do you promote things like that in the city structure? And do you seek support from the city manager and council when appropriate for instituting programs like that and doing the things that you just mentioned? Did we lose you?
Absolutely. You know, I try to make sure it's part of my training budget, first of all. I looked at these programs last year, even before, and then Mounted happened looking. And so it kind of derailed me for a while, but I think we're getting back on track and it's timely. So everything happens for a reason as usual. But certainly I ask for it in my budgets, and if it's something to do this.
And if the call for so-called defunding the police, of course, we don't mean defund and get rid of the police department entirely, but like you mentioned, the mental health calls and things like that. Is there you think that we should retrain police officers to do that, or should we hire other people who've been educated and trained in those types of things? Or and is there a budget adjustment that you think should be made or could be made with the police department to start accomplishing some of these things?
I missed most of that question. What was the question?
I was wondering if you would, when we talk about defunding police, obviously we don't mean getting rid of the department entirely. Would you think we should retrain police officers to handle mental health problems strictly, or should we hire people whose education and training is in that field and have them part of a different department to respond to calls like that? Do you have any idea how it might work? Did we lose you? Yeah.
Chief Hale does not appear to be on the call with us any
Okay.
longer at this point.
All right. Well, I was throwing questions at him that we hadn't even discussed. So at any rate, we're going to go ahead and close this meeting. And I want to thank everybody who attended. And if you have questions that you would like to have presented to the police department or to anybody in city government, you can send them to our email at galvisledems@gmail.com. That's galvisledems@gmail.com. We plan to pursue the issues of community and police relations in the future, as well as being involved in other issues and causes in our city. But this is something that I personally hold dear to heart, and I think that we can do something about racism and understanding between the races and between the police department and the city government. And I hope that that's what we can do I intend to work very hard for that in the future.
This is Chief Hale. I apologize. I think I lost my internet connection, so I just called back in.
Okay. Well, Chief, I was just telling people that I and some of the other people involved in setting this up have planned to pursue the issues of police relations with the community, and we hope to have other meetings, particularly after we can have live meetings. But we'd like to maybe have Zoom meetings with other members of your department or with the union people, et cetera, to talk about these things. And I think that we can all do a great deal in the future to improve race relations in our city. And we're all planning on working very hard to do that. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much, Chief. We appreciate it very much. We can't
If
apply.
you'll send me, I saw there was some more questions in the chat room that I missed, so if y'all email me those, I'll try to send some answers back for you.
Yeah, we told the folks here that if they have questions, they can send them to us and we will forward them. And that's one way that we're going to pursue improving or just expanding communications between the community and the police department.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you. I learned a lot tonight. Take care.
Well, good. Anytime. Y'all have a great evening.
Okay, guys. I guess we'll close it out. Take care.